Let me just read this to you, some of it. NGA Center and CCSSO, their respective subsidiaries, affiliates, licensors, service providers, content providers, employees, agents, officers, and directors will not be liable for any incidental, direct, indirect, punitive, actual, consequential, special, exemplary, or other damages, including loss of revenue or income, pain and suffering, emotional distress, for standards? Does that throw a red flag for anybody else? I mean, do you think that's even possible with a set of silly standards? Really? It is. We'll go over in a second. The other thing is, Bill and Melinda Gates, who are the players? To understand what's happening, you have to understand, follow the money, right? So you can go, Bill Gates, he's very generous, but he gets a tax break for being generous. He's a 501c4, I believe is what he is, a 501c4, which means you can sunshine or FOIA request all of his documentation. You can see how much he donates because he gets a tax break. That's how that's how he does it. He's rich. But here's the thing. You go into his, the Pioneer Institute, you can actually see everywhere he donates his money. And what's so interesting, if you look here, you'll see CCSSO. There's the Fordham Institute, the think tank that was in Jefferson City last week. Remember, they flew into the Capitol last week to testify against the Common Core bill? Yeah, there they are. Common Core, Inc. There's National Governors Association on Bill Gates. There's the Council of Chief State School Officers again. What you need to realize, this is as of 2011, Bill Gates had spent, to the NEA, they had given $7.3 million to endorse the Common Core state standards. They had given $11.3 million to American Federation of Teachers, $2.7 to PTA. Okay, look at these two guys. Between the National Governors Association and the CCSSO, Bill Gates has given over $100 million. Yes. So when you start to draw those lines about who is really pulling the strings, that's what we're against. His father is actually the co-chair, and whether you believe it or not, just know this. When you understand how much he's given and that they own the standards, for me personally, this is an issue, but his father is the co-chair of the Gates Foundation. He was also, as part of the PBS interview Bill Gates did, he's also the head of was at one point the head of Planned Parenthood. This is an issue that I think has to be also a line that's drawn, because there was a cooperative agreement signed by Microsoft and UNESCO. UNESCO is the United Nations Education Branch, basically. But what they did is actually signed a cooperative agreement, and here Microsoft supports the objectives of UNESCO as stipulated in UNESCO's Constitution and intends to contribute to their program priorities. I will just say this. The Constitution of UNESCO is called the Earth Charter. It looks nothing like our Bill of Rights. So when you understand, and you just look into it yourselves, but it's something that we should all fundamentally understand. The Earth Charter was actually developed in the 1990s by Stephen Rockefeller, Maurice Strong, and Mikhail Gorbachev. Arne Duncan said this, and actually we just went over this, so we're not going to go over this again. I don't know why I had this in here twice. But here's the kicker, guys. Teachers have had the ability to play with the standards. The tests, we've not seen the tests yet. They're coming. They'll be here next year. Those are the tests the federal government has paid for. But what Bill Gates says is so telling. He says this, when the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum, just like Diane Ravitch said, that they'll line up as well. So not until we finally see the test will we really get to see the curriculum. So you've been given the standards. Have fun with them. There's no child left behind over your head anymore. Have fun. Teach the standards that well. But when those tests, I call them the big ugly, walks into the room, everything's about to change in the biggest way. It's what's happening in New York, California, Kentucky, and Tennessee. But this is interesting, that Pearson, have you all heard of Pearson, the textbook giant? Yep. Pearson's, the number and 76% market share worldwide. They have a monopoly on textbooks in the global market. But this guy, Sir Michael Barber, if you want to do some research, he's a good one to do some research on. But he actually is the chief education advisor at Pearson. In his speech, actually it's a YouTube speech called The Whole System Revolution, the Education Challenge for the Next Decade, he says this: if you want irreversible reforms, work on the culture and the minds of teachers and parents. He says it's important, otherwise parents or traditionalists might repeal what's been done because of their wish for the past. He defines sustainable reform as irreversible reform and aims to make it so it can never go back to the way it was before. The second largest owner of Pearson stock, 24 million shares, Muammar Gaddafi's son. This comes from Huffington Post. So an understanding that we're not dealing with an American company that owns that brings most of the textbooks into our schools. They're a company from overseas. They're actually a British company. The biggest deal is this: Pearson partners with Bill and Melinda Gates. Guess what they're going to make? Billions. That too. But they are going to develop the online curriculum. They actually formed a monopoly. The two big giants, Microsoft and Pearson. And in their press release from Pearson, they say this: the Pearson Foundation announced a partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates to support America's teachers by creating a full series of digital instructional resources. So I want you to hear Bill Gates in his own words. Go ahead, Sal.
In terms of standards, the state-led Common Core State Standards Initiative is developing clear rigorous standards that will match the best in the world. Last month, 46 governors and chief state school officers made a public commitment to embrace those standards. This is encouraging, but identifying common standards is just the starting point. We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arne Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests.
Okay, not until the test that he just admits is being funded by the federal government and developed by the federal government, not until we see those tests will we see the real curriculum that will teach those tests. That is a huge concern. He also says this comes from the Washington Post. He says it'll be great if our education stuff works, but we're not going to know that for probably a decade. That's why the moms are mad. I don't get a redo with her. I don't get 10 more years to make sure my kids get what they need, Bill Gates. That's why the moms are mad. We don't get a redo while you're experimenting on our children. That is offensive. Bill, and the other thing is, now know this. It's disgusting that Fox News, know this, they're just as much in the can as anyone, because Rupert Murdoch, the owner, he's part of the data company. It's in Bloom, is that right? In Bloom? They're going to make, he says this, he's shameless. He says, when it comes to K through 12 education, we see a $500 billion sector in the U.S. alone that is just waiting desperately to be transformed by big, great breakthroughs that extend the reach of teaching. Are you getting the picture? This is not all about kids. This is about money. This is about money. Yes.
And I just wanted to add, there's a piece out there that's talking about education reformers' vision of teaching in the future. All of that digital media that Bill Gates and Murdoch and everybody else is going to put out there, the whole time it will be collecting data on students and how they perform. And there was a statement made, it was covered at a technology education seminar, and it said that we're looking for companies developing software that can replace teachers for segments of the school day, driving down labor costs. All of that data is going to be used to create the software that will put you out of a job.
Yes. And if you don't think that's true, what I was appalled by, and I can tell you this, and they can answer there more than I, but the thing that I saw is something called Teach for America. Do you know what that is? Well, they lobby the halls of Jefferson City very actively, but what they are, it's if a kid goes to college, and stop me if I'm not telling this right, but if they go to college and they have school loans, because the federal government is now in charge of school loans, right? Well, if you get out of college with a debt, and you want to erase part of your debt, they'll put you in low performance. So if you have a business degree, if you'll go into a low performing school and be a facilitator, not a teacher, but a facilitator for a year, they'll wipe out a chunk of your debt, your college debt. Because it's cheaper. They're cheaper. They're cheaper than teachers. Teachers are expensive and they have opinions usually. They're a liability in the biggest way. They're usually moms too, and moms are scary. Jeb Bush, I just love this picture because he just makes me sick. I shouldn't say that, that's not politically correct, I know, but he's such a big baby, but no, why? And this is not a partisan issue, I can tell you right now straight up. He's a baby because he's got his hand in the can also, because he's connected to Pearson. He has something called the Foundation for Excellence in Education. Sounds great, doesn't it? It's not. He's actually snagged $23 million in contracts to help design the Dean Assessment Test from the federal government. I just thought this was super interesting from the New York Times. Said that Bill Gates, the foundation spent now get this was 2009, the last they could get their tax returns, $373 million on education in 2009, the latest year for which its tax returns are available, and devoted $78 million to advocacy. Now what does advocacy mean? We know what that means. Lobbyists that are walking the halls in Jeff City. Like I told some of you to come with me. Some of you were there last week. And I say, if you ever come to Jefferson City when there's a hearing, if you want to be really creeped out in the biggest way, like I think Google had 3 people at the last hearing. When you understand the millions and millions of dollars that are on the backs of our children, that's what we're fighting. That's what we're fighting. We're not fighting our school board. This is what we're fighting. But the thing is, his grant, his tax filing runs 263 pages and includes 360 education grants, and he gets a tax write-off for that. But this is my favorite story, so bear with me. We went to an interim education committee hearing in Columbia earlier this year. And some of us took our kids, I took Sophie, and another one of my friends took her daughter, and there were several of us, and we all testified against Common Core, and all your representatives sit out kind of a big table, and they're all got their iPads, and so we're sitting there, and this guy from Mizzou walks up, and he's very smart, he's a professor at Mizzou, and he sits down, and he goes, I believe in Common Core standards because they are, I think it was like an inch wide, a mile high or something. They always use the same phrase, and I should know it by now, but he's talking about how wonderful the standards are. Well, Dr. Mary Byrne, if you've not met her, oh, she's such a treat, but she's such a lady. But she taps on my shoulder, and she passes me this page. And I look at it. Well, I've already testified, so is Sophie. So there's one person in our group, and it was the 13-year-old girl right in front of me that hadn't testified. So I tapped on her shoulder, and I put this paper in front of her like this, and her blonde head just does this. I could just see it from the back. I thought, oh, please, God, let her get it, let her get it. We couldn't talk, But she walks up to the representatives, and she sits down, she's like, yeah, that guy that just testified, I don't think you should take his testimony that serious because, and she read it. She said, because from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the University of Missouri-Columbia, in August of 2013, just received $249,826, and look right here, what for? Purpose? To support the implementation of the Common Core state standards. That was great, my favorite. And you know what? The guy just wanted to slink down in his seat, but what happened is all those representatives started getting on their iPads and Googling, and they all started nodding their head. They found it. It was true. When people have an opinion usually that's positive, it's usually their job to have that opinion, or they got paid to. Federal involvement, I'm going to go through this pretty quick. Why did Missouri sign on to copyrighted standards? Something called stimulus. We did it for stimulus. They were called the four assurances, and they got their requirement that each governor in all 50 states had to provide assurances. Oopsie, dang it. They had to provide assurances they would pursue reforms in these four areas in exchange for their stimulus dollars. The four areas of assurances, and this is why education, Common Core is not just about a set of standards. We can fight standards all day long, and I'm going to let the teachers win 9 times out of 10 because I don't know much about standards. But I can tell you this, that the reason we got money, we had to adopt a federally approved set of standards. We did that with Common Core. We had to agree to teacher evaluations. They'll be administered by the state, overseen by the federal government. That's never happened before, teachers. And that those evaluations will be tied to student performance. These new tests that the federal government's paying for, they're going to dictate teacher evaluations. Turnaround low-performing schools, that's MSEP 5, and data. We had to agree to collect inordinate amounts of data. We did all 4, and we got a significant amount of money. But here's the thing I think you all should know. When they talk about these standards being internationally benchmarked, know this. Arne Duncan said this, the Obama administration has sought to fundamentally shift the federal role so the department is doing much more to support reform in states, districts, and local communities. Virtually everyone thought the president was dreaming, but at that time, 37 states and the District of Columbia have already chosen to adopt the new state-crafted standards in math and English. Now here's the part. Are these really internationally benchmarked? Because what he says right here, they didn't study it, not thinking about it, not even issuing a white paper. They have actually just done it. Are they proven? Because he's telling UNESCO, big bunch of big dummies. We just dangled the carrot. Remember the carrot he was talking about? We just dangled the money carrot, and they came a-running. How much did we get? Missouri got $1.73 billion in stimulus to fulfill the 4 promises. It wasn't about race to the top that we didn't get, it's about this. This is why when teachers say, oh, it's just not a trend, we'll get through it. This is way different. We've signed contractual obligations with the federal government. We won't get out of this one. Standards. Jay Nixon signed a memorandum of understanding. He did that in June of 2009. You know how they say they were state-crafted, state-led, all these teachers had all this input? The legislature had no knowledge, did not consent, but the standards weren't even released for review until March of 2010. It's kind of like signing up for something that you don't really know what you're getting. That's right. Yeah, right. Why not? He actually signed on to essentially a paragraph that looked essentially something like this, and it sounds good by all intents and purposes. Second assurance. And I'm going to skip through this pretty quick, but teachers are always interested. So bear with me, teachers. I know this gets long, but I know a lot of you, this is like your second or third or fourth time to hear me do this, so God bless you. For the NCLB waiver, the No Child Left Behind waiver, we agreed as a state, not a district, to evaluate our teachers tied to the new assessments. The assessments here's the problem, the assessments have no validity, no reliability studies attached. We haven't even seen them. In fact, in many districts across the state of Missouri, they conducted field tests last week. They used your children as human guinea pigs. That data will never come to your school. You as a parent will never see that data. They will use that data to develop tests that they'll turn around and sell us for millions of dollars. It's a waste. No transparency in many cases was given to parents so they knew what was happening to their children. This just happened. But the fact is, teacher evaluations are going to be tied to these tests that we have not seen yet. Governor Nixon knows it's going to be super controversial, teachers, and it's going to cost a truckload of money. If school board members are in this audience, you remember I said this right now. Nobody knows how you're going to pay for it. It's not the summative assessment. These will be formative assessments. And what the governor said, and I'm not joking, he said this. He said it's kind of controversial to get through. He said we focus kind of a little bit on focusing on a coalition of the willing, trying to get people to volunteer to do it. He said it was very controversial to get through, and the only way we could move forward was with a cooperative measures. Sophie, I'm going to have you play the video. I want you to hear just the first part. Listen to what he says about how controversial it is to get through the legislature. So they're going to create their own data to bring back to the legislature with, so they can get the legislature to try to pay for it. Go ahead, son.
I'll be real quick, because we focused on kind of a little bit of the coalition of the willing on the front end, trying to put an evaluation pilot study in place and getting people to volunteer to do it, and then we'll prove it on the backside what works. And so that was kind of our theory as we went in. We're including all of the usual things you need as far as measuring measuring student growth, academic growth, linking teachers to leaders and whatnot, and then using it as a part of the evaluation to set up then, if this moves forward, that we'll be able to use it on the compensation grid as well. It was very controversial to get through, and the only way we could move it forward was to get this cooperative measure. But we should have very, very strong data very soon to see if a number of the indicators that you had. One of the challenges we have had is there's been a long talk about kind of should you use student tests to count, should you use leadership skills to count, and rather than fight our way through the legislature, we found a coalition of the willing to move.
Rather than fight our way through the legislature, we found a coalition of the willing. And here's the issue, teachers. It's coming. I'm just telling you, it's coming. They don't know how to pay for it. And they know it's going to be controversial. But here's the big part, teachers. Pay attention. Because, is that the best picture? I think you guys would appreciate it. That's because I like it. Emails. This is what happened. So, and now stick with me on this because it's kind of confusing. But Rex Sinquefield is a philanthropist billionaire who wants to remove teacher tenure in the state of Missouri. For the life of me, you all need to know that teacher tenure, all it means is a teacher can get due process. A teacher is entitled to due process. Without it, a teacher can be literally removed for no reason at all. We are fighting against that initiative. I should say publicly, taking a position. I'm a teacher's wife. I think it's unfair because I believe teachers should be evaluated, but not on tests where there's no validity or reliability studies attached. But this was for an initiative. And what happened was, in order for it to be put on the ballot, they had to send it to the auditor's office to say, how much is this going to cost? What's the fiscal note to the state of Missouri? So this story came out 11/10, so November 20th, of 2013. What happened? Someone from the NEA, they sunshine requested Kristen Castro's emails. And the NEA actually makes some assertions about what they think the teacher evaluations are going to cost Missouri. That the NEA suggested, the Missouri NEA suggested to the auditor's office that the initiative could cost $5.5 billion to implement, an additional $93 million annually to develop and administer standardized tests. Now get this, a lot of teachers are like, well, I'm a kindergarten teacher. I'm good. You're not good. Because they're telling you right here, it's going to be for every subject at every grade level, for use in staff evaluations. They know what's coming at the state level. Your unions do. And Kristen Castro, when that auditor's report came out, she did not like how it looked. And this is what got pulled. She crossed out where it said, this is what your auditor showed, the potential for significant unknown costs to local districts. Well, she didn't like that. So she crossed out the potential for significant unknown and just put unknown. The significant part means it could cost your districts a tremendous amount to implement. So she went and she signed through that. Well, we got our hands on it, as did everyone else. But here's what I want you to see, because what we learned with the auditor's report, and I know this, the ballot initiative went nowhere in 2012. But we got an auditor's report out of it. So know that as far as trying to assert, that this is because it's really went, because she'll say it didn't actually, this is just conjecture, but know this is what the auditor's telling you as a district. They're saying this, Administering assessments for pre-K through second grade students is significantly more costly for school districts, as much of this testing must be administered one-on-one. This means the district hires a substitute for the several days it takes for a classroom teacher to complete individual student assessments. This is pre-K through second. Every teacher will be evaluated. Pre-K through second, because your auditor's telling you it's going to cost a lot for those kids. The other part, and I'm going to tell you, everyone's asking us, well, how much of the evaluation will be tied to tests? We don't know. And if I told you we knew for sure, that would be a lie. But I can tell you what's interesting in the auditor's report that DESE submitted for the auditor. They reference something called the Colorado experience, where they talk about at least 50% of this test scores being tied to teacher evaluation. Now, what they're telling districts is, no, you have the ability, district by district, to choose how much that's going to be. That is true, but that is true at this point. But know this, when the AFT and the NEA and the MSTA all got a hold of this Kristen Castro debacle with teachers, it kind of went crazy. And she had to do some damage control November 22nd of 13. And she had to answer some costing that she had marked out. So she sends this memorandum to these three organizations, AFT, MEA, MSTA. And she said, as for the cost estimates, simply stated the costs are unknown. She said, the fact is, in this case, the cost could vary from 0 to a lot. The cost could be 0 for districts that choose, now get this part, the cost could be 0 for districts that choose to use the state models, forms, procedures, and training. But if your own district wants to do it their way, she says this, for districts that choose to develop their own system, the cost could be in the millions. So do you understand what she's saying? Your district has the ability to do their own model. It's going to cost that a lot. But if you accept their model, it can cost nothing. Bill Gates, teachers, just know this, he's donated $5 billion to put cameras in all your classrooms to help you teach better. The state auditor's watching. He's actually requested documents from DESE considering an audit. MSEP 5, I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. It's the accountability card. If there are principals in the room, you know what I'm talking about. It's a moving target. You didn't get your input this time. You didn't get time to comment on it. What I heard from a superintendent 3 weeks ago, they change it all the time. It's not fair. But MSEP 5 is the accreditation piece. But to know this, the Normandy superintendent says this of DESE and the State Board of Ed. What is happening to the Normandy School District at the hands of the State Board of Ed is politically obscene and borderline criminal. He says clearly over the course of the past 3 years, the State Board of Ed and DESE have been setting our district up to fail through the accreditation piece. Just that last winter, December, the Kansas City Public School District they plan to file a lawsuit against the State Board of Education and DESE for exactly the same reason. They feel that they've been set up to fail through the accreditation model. In fact, Maria Chapal-Nadal and how many other 16 or 17 other Democratic, is that right? Democrat senators and reps? 9 have called for the resignation of your Commissioner of Education, and this is why she says, because she's less than truthful in dealing with the legislature. And we would agree. Yes, data systems. That is a big deal to many parents. The Smarter Balance is the way they're going to do a lot of it. That's the Smarter Balance is a test our children will be taking. And they tell you on their website, which is smarterbalance.org, they're one of 2 multi-state consortia awarded funding from the U.S. Department of Ed to develop assessments. We signed off on it on 5 of 10. But what happened was when Missouri signed on to SBAC, so we're a part of this little club of states that are going to take one test, they turned around and signed an agreement with the federal government, with the Federal Department of Education. So the SBAC agreement says this award is a cooperative agreement because the Secretary of Ed has determined that substantial communication, coordination, and involvement between the U.S. Department of Ed and the recipient is necessary to carry out a successful project. They talk about they're going to develop the new assessments, but they also say this: it's not limited to working with the department to develop a strategy to make student-level data that results from the assessments available for ongoing basis for research. The reason we did it is we got a grant for it. In this amount, almost $9 million. It's called MOSIS in your school. We also signed a cooperative agreement with the federal government to get this money to give them our data on our kids. You want to read this grant? It'll make you mad because they say they don't collect personally identifiable information. The grant actually says something different. The grant looks like this. It's about 300 some odd pages long. But here's the kicker, everybody. If you don't get much, get this today. Every time someone tells you, oh, don't worry, we have protections in place, FERPA, privacy laws, they govern everything. It's like FERPA is the HIPAA of education, all right? The problem is that in 2008, amendments to FERPA gave third parties, including private companies, increased access to student data because they expanded the definitions of what a school official was. That includes now contractors, consultants, volunteers, and other parties to whom an educational agency or institution has outsourced some of its functions. In 2011, Arne Duncan unilaterally amended it again. And those contractors now, they have nothing to do with the school. He allowed the release of student records for non-academic purposes. Now this has created a lot of strife at the federal level. Blaine Luetkemeyer is among many that are having a fit because they said, you've circumvented Congress. Your agency took regulatory actions to alter definitions. With the technological advances that have occurred, changes to FERPA deserve the full scrutiny of the legislature. They're screaming at the federal level. They're trying to undo it. These are all some of the congressmen and women. But just to give you a teeny little snapshot, when DESE collects information, they have all these different entities that like wash it, and they have all these terms. But you'll see on this side, ESP Solutions Group, there's DESE. But here's what they say about themselves. They provide extraordinary insight into P20W, that's prenatal to 20 years old or the workforce, that they're collecting data on our children. And they'll say pre-kindergarten through workforce, data systems, and psychometrics. Now, what does psychometrics mean? Well, know this, that there was we had a hearing, how many weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, to try to keep your children's data safe. Well, DESE says they don't collect data, so DESE didn't testify against that bill. This is the bill, 1873. 19 pages long to keep our children's data safe. But you know who was there to oppose it? Google. They were having a pure, deluxe, ugly fit because they want that data. What did they say about the data?
Unfortunately, what they said to the committee was, this is too complex for you to understand. Basically, you're too dumb to understand data collection. Not a good way to start your testimony. But Google has an entire suite of educational apps that they're giving to the schools for free out of the goodness of their heart. But in 2 weeks before that particular hearing, in a court in California, Google finally had to admit that yes, our apps collect data, even if you turn off the feature